waiting for anybody?
I think we're all set.
Okay, I guess then we can get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants in the Arctic Observing Summit 2020. My name is Peter Schlosser, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the organizing committee of AOS 2020. On behalf of the International AOS Organizing Committee, which is co-chaired by Þorsteinn Gunnarsson, Hajo Eichen, and myself, it's a great pleasure and privilege for me to welcome you all to the 2020 Arctic Observing Summit. Although naturally we all would have liked to be together in Iceland, we had to change our plans. As all of you know, the world right now is experiencing special and atypical situation, and due to the restrictions imposed on global society by the spreading of the coronavirus and the related COVID-19 disease, we will conduct this summit as a virtual meeting for the first time in the history of the Arctic Observing Summits. But due to the heroic efforts of the local organizers and members of the organizing committee and working groups, it was possible to shift the summit from an in-person meeting to a completely online gathering. And based on what I have seen during the preparation, I'm confident that the new format will allow productive deliberations and, as always, will result in significant outcomes and recommendations. A little bit of context, AOS 2020 is the 5th Arctic Observing Summit. It follows the summits held in Vancouver 2013, Helsinki 2014, Fairbanks 2016, and Davos 2018. The summits are held in conjunction with the Arctic Summit Science Weeks in alternate years. The Arctic Observing Summits are a task of SEON, which is the Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks. And you will see throughout the summit how AOS 2020 is closely interlinked with SEON, here especially through the so-called ROADS, the Roadmap for Arctic Observing and Data Systems. The Arctic Observing Summit has been designed as a biannual summit that aims to provide community-driven, science-based guidance for the design, implementation, coordination, and sustained long-term operation of an international network of Arctic observing systems that cover all domains of the Arctic. And when we are talking about long-term, we mean decades and possibly beyond. In practice, this means gathering the Arctic observing community together to exchange ideas, develop ways to collaborate, share resources, and improve Arctic observing. Each Arctic Observing Summit has a specific theme, and the theme of AOS 2020 is Observing for Action. As you can see from the program that's posted online, I'm sure many of you have already studied that and looked at it. The summit consists of a mixture of keynote addresses, panel discussions, and deliberations in working groups. Keynote addresses have been recorded and are posted on the AOS webpage, so you can listen to them whenever you have time or at your leisure. The 5 working groups play a special role in the summit. They have conducted work before the summit to prepare the discussions during the summit, and the deliberations during this meeting will form the foundation for the conference statement and the recommendations, but also will play heavily into the further development of the SEON ROADS process. The themes of the working groups and the charge of the working groups have been posted as a presentation by Hajo Eichen, so you can find that on the website. So with that, I wish all of you a rewarding experience of this virtual meeting, unusual as it might feel at the beginning. I'm sure as we go deeper into it, it will become fairly natural. So thank you for your attention, and I will hand over to Þorsteinn Gunnarsson for his remarks.
Thank you, Peter. Dear AOS 2020 participants, my name is Þorsteinn Gunnarsson. I work for the Icelandic Center for Research, RANIS, and I am co-chair of the AOS 2020 Executive Committee representing the local organizers. I am both extremely pleased and honored to welcome all of you to the Arctic Observing Summit 2020. As you can imagine, for the local organizers and the AOS community, it has been hard work to change this summit at last minute into an online conference. Yet, we are proud, and this shows that the Arctic communities rise to the challenges they are facing with, and do so with commitment and the determination that in the end we will succeed. Peter went over with us what the AOS is all about and why are we here. And in short, we are here to provide guidance to the Arctic communities for an international network of Arctic observing systems which serves the needs of the Arctic communities. This is not an easy task in a rapidly changing environment, but I encourage you to bear in mind that our task here must always be relevant to the people who are living in the Arctic and are facing these changes every day. And I'm particularly pleased that at this AOS summit, we will have a special working group that is committed to deal with food security and indigenous needs in that regard. Within SEON, under the leadership of Sandy Starkweather, current chair of SEON, we have developed a roadmap for Arctic observing and data systems, and I am extremely pleased with how this roadmap integrates very well the scientific needs of an international Arctic observing system with the societal benefits of the Arctic communities. This roadmap and various other important materials such as white papers give the working groups at this summit a good background for our journey to develop and establish an international Arctic observing system. Yet your input and contribution to these ideas and plans at the summit are vital for all of us to succeed in this challenging task. We will take our message from the summit to ASM3 in Tokyo in November, where the Arctic science ministers are meeting. We can expect that the need for Arctic observing system will be high on their agenda. Yet it is only with a concerted efforts of the scientists, Arctic inhabitants and policymakers on an international level that our vision will become a reality. When converting this summit into an online conference by using modern communication technology, we have shown to the world the resourcefulness of the Arctic communities when we deal with unexpected and unwelcome events. I'm extremely grateful to all of you who have worked so hard for this to happen, the local organizing team in Iceland, my colleagues at Rannis and the University of Akureyri, our partners in Alaska, California, Canada, and elsewhere, and the AOS Executive Committee. I wish all of us fruitful and enjoyable AOS Summit in this innovative yet Arctic environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Þorsteinn, and good day, everybody. I'm Hayo Aiken. I'm Director of the International Arctic Research Center at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I'm one of the co-organizers of the Arctic Observing Summit. I wanted to also welcome you to this starting session that gives us an opportunity to hear from the organizers and the working group leads, and allows for brief questions that you can address by typing them into the chat box. Before we hear from the individual working group leads and co-leads, I just wanted to briefly, for those of you who haven't had a chance to look around the AOS online website, just briefly give you a perspective on where you can find additional information that is relevant to navigating the summit. I have shared here with you the Arctic Observing Summit 2020 program pages that you can access yourselves. One of the background presentations that may be helpful that Peter already mentioned is the specific charge to the working groups that you find at the very bottom of the page here. But more than that, I would like to encourage you to listen to some of the keynote and opening presentations that you can also access at your leisure whenever you have time, specifically the plenary presentation by Dr. Yuji Kodama with the National Institute of Polar Research in Japan. As you may be aware, Japan and Iceland are co-hosting the third Arctic Science Ministerial, which will be held in Japan late this year. Dr. Kodama is a member of the Ministerial Organizing Committee, and his presentation provides more background on how the deliberations and the various points that we will be working on during the Arctic Observing Summit will then help inform the Arctic Science Ministerial. Also of interest is Dr. Sandy Starkweather's presentation. Þorsteinn already highlighted her role as the chair of the SEAN board, the Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks Initiative of the Arctic Council and the International Arctic Science Committee. And you may also find her presentation quite helpful in seeing where work at the summit will lead down the road. And in fact, that road will be guided by the SEAN roadmap for Arctic observing and data systems. And you might have already had a chance to see the live presentation by Minister Gudmundur Gudbrandsson from Iceland's environmental minister, who gave a very nice inviting opening presentation as well via YouTube Live. So you'll be able to navigate the website here with additional resources. Again, if you want more details, I'd encourage you to look at some of the background material. You have another 24 hours or so before the most of the working groups start kicking off in earnest. So at this point, I would like to invite brief comments, statements from the AOS 2020 working group leads on their respective work, and I'd like to start with working group 1, co-led by Alice Bradley, Roberta Pierazzini, and I'd like to ask the working group co-leads to briefly introduce themselves and say a few words about the goals and work in their working groups. Alice, if I could ask you to start, and working group 1, just as a reminder, is focused on design, optimization, implementation of coordinated observing systems. Alice?
Thanks, Hayo. I'm Alice Bradley, faculty at Williams College in the US, one of the co-chairs of Working Group 1. As for our plans for the summit, I would especially refer you to watch Sandy Starkweather's keynote on the roads process and how this all fits into SEAN, because a lot of the work for Working Group 1 is going to be feeding into that process. So our 3 big aims for this summit are to gather feedback and suggestions for structures for coordinating and organizing observational efforts writ large. Secondly, to discuss and define essential Arctic variables, gather input on how these kind of key ideas and key variables in Arctic observing can be defined and structured, and linking those to societal benefit areas and then ultimately observational requirements. So we have a number of discussions planned, especially with small group discussions, in order to build out these links in a way that we can then feed back into the roads process and make sure it's as reflective as possible of community needs. And then finally, we have a number of open sessions to gather input, to gather new ideas from the summit. Much of the stuff that we're doing at this summit came out of ideas that were generated at the last one. So we want to make sure to continue this process, have opportunities to really focus on the kind of community input from the observing community that we can get in this AOS setting. Roberta, do you have anything else to add?
Hi, hello. I am Roberta Pierazzini from Finnish Meteorological Institute, and Yes, I co-lead the working group 1 with Alice and Hayo. Actually, I don't have much to add. You have already explained the essence of our working group. We will have some invited presentation, also short one, but will help to frame the discussion and give example also to the other participants. Yeah, so that's all.
Great. Thank you, Alice and Roberta. And as I mentioned earlier, if there are brief questions on some of the activities in working groups or clarifying questions, we'll be able to take those in the form of questions posted in the chat window at the end of today's opening presentation. So next we come to working.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to clarify. We're going to use the Q&A box for questions. They're a little easier to manage, and then there's also a chat box for other chats and sharing links and things like that. But questions should go in the Q&A box. Sorry, go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks. That's the voice from the background, Alan Pope, one of the key co-organizers at the local organizing committee level. We appreciate all your support, Alan, and thanks also to your team. So you heard it from Alan. Please use the Q&A box that you have accessible through your Zoom interface. So let's move on to working group number 2. That working group is focusing on observations in support of adaptation mitigation. And I'd like to ask Chair Maribeth Murray to tell us a bit more about that. Maribeth?
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. And if I disappear, it's because I'm out in the country in the middle of a snowstorm. So apologies in advance. I am the director of the Arctic Institute of North America at the University of Calgary. And I have been a member of the Executive Organizing Committee of the Arctic Observing Summit since the first summit back in 2013. Just a little bit of information about our working group. We have focused on environmental issues and the role of observing in the development of policy and the implementation of actions in support of adaptation and mitigation. We have a number of papers and short presentations that will be presented in our first working group session tomorrow to give everyone up to speed. But just quickly here, our working group has been reviewing and discussing and developing recommendations on key aspects related to the successful use of observing technologies to improve or facilitate decision support, risk management, adaptation initiatives, and mitigation strategies, as these are linked to societal benefit areas. We've also been looking at observing needs that should be filled quickly or expanded to support scaling up of strategies for adaptation and mitigation, and particularly over the short term. The submissions to our working group have covered a variety of different topics related to the successful use of observing technologies and multidisciplinary approaches to improve decision support and risk management. We have papers and participants that have emphasized the urgency of expanding the reach of observing systems, as well as stressing the need for the continued and improved engagement with members of Arctic communities and the need for multi-directional communication to facilitate the gathering, interpretation, and dissemination of information to more effectively inform adaptation and mitigation. So we will be having 2 sessions starting tomorrow, as well as cross-cutting sessions. We look forward to enthusiastic engagement, and then I hope we will be able to also effectively support and inform the activities of Working Group 1 and the Rhodes document, and moving forward on SAON. And I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks, Maribeth. Moving on to Working Group 3. The working group is led by Rachel Daniel. I'd like to also acknowledge that Gunbert Retter from the Sami Council was initially helping with the working group, but then was prevented from continuing further by other demands on their time, but we appreciate her initial engagement. Working Group 3 is focusing on observing in support of Indigenous food security and related needs. And I'd like to pass it off to Rachel Daniel to talk a bit more about her working group. Rachel?
I don't actually see Rachel's username, unfortunately. It's possible, Rachel, if you're on and logged on for a different username or something like that that I'm not seeing, please use the raise hand function and I'll make sure to hand you the microphone.
I thought I saw her name earlier, but let's move on to working group 4 then,
It might be.
Revisit.
Sorry, Hayo, it's Eva. It might be that Michelle is preparing for something else right now because there's another prep meeting. If she's not on, I can give a little introduction.
Yes, that would be great. So Eva Krumel, who's been involved very much with the working group as well. Eva?
Yeah, thank you, Hayo. So my name is Eva Krumel. I'm working for the Inuit Circumpolar Council in Canada and have been involved in SEON and the AOS from very initial stages, and also being part of the organizing committee. The Food Security Working Group has formed because the meaning of food security from an indigenous people's perspective is holistic and interconnected across the different systems. And that means social, biological, chemical, physical, cultural, spiritual, and health and well-being. And indigenous peoples organizations have identified drivers of food insecurity through indigenous approaches and methodologies. So the key role of the Indigenous Food Security Working Group is to provide guidance on how to identify the processes, connectivity, and types of observations needed from a food security perspective. And therefore, the Food Security Working Group is focusing on building a food security framework. And the goal here during the AOS is particularly to expand on the food security observing lens as it relates to identifying important observations and variables. So as was said before, the roadmap, the roads process has been developed, and the idea is to identify a framework within which impactful essential Arctic variables can be assessed. And that's jointly between data users and observing network operators and prioritized. And the Food Security Working Group is already meeting today at 2 at Eastern Daylight Time in North America, and that's 6 p.m. UTC, I believe. And we'll be meeting until 5 for 3 hours, and then also the next few days. And there is a pre-registration also that if you click on the website link, you can register for the meeting, and there are just a few questions that the organizers would like to know, and everybody's welcome to participate. So I think that's it for now, but if I can answer any questions, I hope I can do that as well.
Great, thank you, Eva, for jumping in there. Let's move on to working group number 4, data interoperability and federated search. The working group is headed by Peter Pulsifer. Peter?
Thank you, Hayo. This is Peter Pulsifer. I'm with Carleton University in Ottawa, as well as the National Snow and Ice Data Center at University of Colorado. I chair the IASC SEON Arctic Data Committee, so it is part of the ROADS process that you've heard about. We're coming from a number of different activities where we've brought the community together, including at the Arctic Observing Summit in 2018 and before that, but more recently at the Polar Data Forum that happened towards the end of 2019. So at that forum, we brought together over 100 people to talk about polar data and Arctic data specifically as well. And in that, we identified a number of different key themes, priority areas, et cetera, that build on previous works. And these are generally around the social and organizational aspects of what we're doing, so our community building and coordination, including all users, communities, rights holders, and stakeholders. So not just the research community or the data people, but everybody who needs to be involved. So that was one of the key outcomes or highlights at that meeting, along with other things like identifying data discovery, priorities, semantics, and the importance now of platform and model-based science. So heading into the Arctic Observing Summit now in Subteam 4, we really want to build on the momentum and the work that has been done and take it to that next level, and particularly in as part of the AOS and as part of the roads process. So specifically within the working group, what we'll be working to do in our sessions is to, first of all, review and confirm the priorities based on these past activities. So hoping that we have new voices and new discussions around what we need to be thinking about prioritizing. We'll be integrating submitted white papers. So there are a number of data white papers. So we'll be looking at those and the messages and themes set out there. We'll then be discussing and establishing strategies and very concrete methods to address these various sub-themes, priorities, requirements, etc. And I think this will be the prime activity in the working group sessions, so much of our time will be spent there. And then we also want to connect with other working groups. So this will be challenging given the format of the meeting, but it may happen during or after because this is really a cross-cutting theme. And then finally, we would wrap up by drafting a statement similar to the one that we drafted out of the Arctic Observing Summit in 2018 that could be used for a number of purposes, including submission to things like the Arctic Science Ministerial. So the last couple of sessions will be focused on drafting and refining what we did in the previous sessions. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Peter. Before we move on to Working Group 5, I would like to encourage those in the online who are joining the meeting here. If you do have questions for the working group leads or any of the organizing committee members, please enter those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. Those are questions that we'll be able to take here in the next few minutes after individual introductions from the working groups. And then after those questions, we did want to have a brief conversation with some additional remarks by Peter Schlosser on where we see the Arctic Observing Summit fitting into the broader challenges we're facing in the context of COVID-19 and some of its anticipated aftermath. So please consider questions. I see we have one here from Italy already. That's great, so we'll get to that in a minute. But prior, I'd like to introduce and give the leads of working group number 5, which is focused on Arctic observations in the context of global observing initiatives, the chance to introduce their working group. The working group is co-led by Þorsteinn Gunnarsson, Peter Schlosser, and Jen Renee Larsen. And I'd like to ask Jen to give us a brief introduction.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jen Renee Larsen. I work for the SAN Secretariat. Thanks for the introduction. Together with Peter Schlosser and Þorsteinn Gunnarsson, I'll be chairing Working Group 5, which will deal with sustained Arctic observing in the context also of global processes. Now, as has been said earlier, the goal of this summit is to lay the foundation for the SAN Roads process, an inclusive process where we would want different programs or teams to be able to work with us specifically within the context of global essential variables, but also Arctic specific essential variables. And what we would like to work with in this working group is to understand global and regional processes, learn from them how they have been working with essential variables. Identifying impactful essential variables is a process which also involves assessing these, seeing them in the light of societal benefit areas, and we would like to understand how other initiatives, both global and regional ones, have done this before. We do not want to reinvent these processes. We do not want to reinvent essential variables. We would like to understand how this has been done earlier on. And we know that these other initiatives have been through different processes, and we would like to establish a framework where within the Arctic context we can assess essential variables as well, seeing to a large extent existing variables through an Arctic lens. We would also like to see beyond the AOS. We would like to define an engagement process where we engage not only regional, global, but other also initiatives to work within the roads process to define essential variables for the future. understanding that some of these initiatives are already present in the Arctic, while there are also parts that will need to be developed kind of from the bottom up. We also hope to be able to prepare some statements and some statements for the final summit statement on the way forward for this process, learning from other initiatives. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Jan. So with that, I'd like to move into a bit of a question and answers part of the session here. I see that Vito Vitale from Italy asked 2 questions. Actually, the first one, which was already answered, so you can look at that in the answered window, but just as a bit more background, Working Group 3, the Indigenous Food Security Working Group, had asked for pre-registration for participants in their session, simply because it's a very interactive working group. The group has, prior to the summit, for a number of months already worked with somewhere on the order of 30 to 40 members, many of them Indigenous participants from remote Arctic communities. And they felt it would be important for people to share their background, their interests before and getting additional information on what matters to the working group prior to joining the actual sessions. That is the only working group out of the 5 that's actually asking for pre-registration, but this is not to be exclusive, but rather to be more effective in looping participants into their work. But this does raise the broader question that Vito also asked, and that is in which way other working groups will collect information on participants and contributors to the work. And that's where I would like to highlight a few components of the online version of the summit. So as you join working groups, which you can easily do simply by clicking on a Zoom link for the particular working group, as you join different working groups, you're asked to then also, of course, in the context of the meeting, the working group meetings, which will be recorded, to participate under your own name, such that the leads for the working groups can follow up with people individually. We do, of course, hope that you are registering for the online meeting, which is the basic way for us to communicate and directly connect with individual people who've joined working groups. If you visit the Arctic Observing Summit online website, right at the front, you'll see a link to register, and the Icelandic organizers have been very generous in allowing for different options to register, all of which we find are quite reasonable and will allow people, regardless of their background and ability to participate in the meeting. But registration is important because that is the key mechanism through which we know that people are participating. So in the individual working groups, the actual outcomes and products from those will be recorded through a range of rapporteurs and volunteers who are working with the working groups, capturing the content of these sessions. And again, that's a way for us to capture specific individual contributions from collaborators or people who have joined those meetings. I do want to also highlight another opportunity that's relevant here in terms of participation contribution, and that is something I'd actually like to share here as well. If you look at your screen, you are now at the Arctic Observing Summit white paper page. These white papers have been contributed prior to the summit, and you can see them all accessible and listed by working group number here, along with key contacts. Part of the effort in these different working groups is to take this input, which was provided prior to the summit, and then transform it into both guidance for observing system coordination and more specific scientific products after the summit. And to help with that, we actually will open a special issue of the journal Arctic for contributions that come out of the summit The hope being that one way in which participants in the different working groups can contribute more substantively is to join writing teams or authorship teams for white papers that emerge into full-scale scientific papers to be submitted to the special issue of the journal Arctic. On that, actually, I don't know whether Maribeth Mary, who's heading the institute that's actually publishing the journal Arctic, would like to add anything. Maribeth, special issue, any comments from your perspective?
Sure, yeah. So we'd be looking at getting that issue out in about 12 months from now. So before the summit ends on the 2nd, I think it's 2nd, this week, we'll put out a timeline just to give people a sense of when we'd want to see submissions and how long we think review will take and that sort of thing.
Great, thanks very much, Maribeth. I see there was another question that Alan already answered by Lawrence Gunzefeld in terms of how many we are expecting to join the different working group sessions. You can see the number of attendees now here, that's 81, and Alan already encouraged you to use the chat box to see what are people's interests. But in general, as you can imagine, that's one of the big challenges for us now with the Arctic Observing Summit. In many respects, the meeting now has the potential to be more inclusive and more open than it was before, simply because people do not have to travel in person to Iceland, which not everybody may be able to do for schedule reasons or just reasons of access. And of course, that's different now that the summit is fully online. But that also makes it a bit more challenging for the different working groups who at this point have some idea of the size of participation based on registration numbers for the summit itself, where we're anticipating that working groups are likely going to be in the size of about 30 to 50 each. You know, keeping in mind also that we're splitting up each working group into sessions that are timed to be more convenient for Asian and Eastern European participants, and then another session that's better timed for participants in Western Europe and North America. So keeping that in mind, the fact that it's a bit challenging to identify how many folks are going to be in individual working groups, we ask you to be patient and communicate clearly in that regard as well. I think that should address that question. I see there's another question here by Kelly Ulig, participation in each working group breakout session. As I already mentioned, we've tried to duplicate those so that we have one more for Asian, Eastern European time zones, one more for Western Europe, North American time zones, and those are in some respects duplicate sessions. So we don't expect you to be a 24/7 participant, but rather pick those sessions that you feel work best for you in terms of the timing. Sandy Starkweather also asked a question along the lines of working groups. Should you choose to focus on a single working group? I would say our experiences, and actually I don't want to monopolize the conversation here, so if others from the organizing committee want to chime in, but our experience has been that sticking with one working group makes you a more effective collaborator because you follow the working group through the various steps of the summit. And if you do that, you still have an opportunity to participate in conversations that are cross-cutting across different working groups. If you look at the agenda, there's 2 blocks of time set aside for cross-working group conversations as well. And those are for people who are affiliated with just one working group but want to get a better feel for what's happening in other working groups. So that would be my recommendation here is engage with a single working group only. Anybody want to add anything from the organizing committee here?
I think that that makes a lot of sense, and that's also based on the experience from past summits. That seems to be the best way to operate. If there is something that is discussed in another working group that you are really, highly interested in, and that you heard from these, either from the working group chair or from members of that group, that this will take place during a particular part of a session or during a specific session, then it's of course okay to move over into another working group to hear that specific part of the discussion. But overall, I agree with Hayo that sticking in general with one is actually a good mode.
And if you're looking for details on working group discussion sections, under the working group tab on the website, each group has a link to their agenda, or often it's listed as a message from the organizers, but there is information available there as to what individual groups are going to be talking about.
Yes, thank you, Alice. That was a great comment. So this is just a reminder. This is the working groups tab on the online program. If you go through, you have for each of the working groups, some of them still need to update those. Those will be posted tomorrow. But you have the relevant information that gives you, if you click on this here, I don't want to do this now because it's going to generate a PDF file, but these different messages from the organizers give you a detailed agenda for each working group and more information. You can see this here, for example, working group 3, where you have the most important background documents highlighted as well. So this, I think, then also gets to the question that Michael Karcher was asking here, and that is, in general participation. We'd like to make sure that everybody is aware that the working group sessions will all be recorded, so people, and will be posted, so people can review those on their own time. We're hoping to have those up very soon after they conclude. So for those folks who are in time zones where a working group session that they might have been interested in just wasn't accessible because of the timing, you would then have in the morning hours of your day, the subsequent day, an opportunity to review what actually took place in those working group sessions. And the same is true, again, if you click through these links here, we have Google sites that will be capturing the notes that rapporteurs are keeping of the conversations of the working groups that are going to be accessible to working group members as well. So as you can see, and I do want to acknowledge the team here at International Arctic Research Center at the University of Calgary, and with the Icelandic organizers, University of Akureyri, who've been working frantically over the last couple of weeks to put this online framework in place here. But we're hopeful that there's enough different ways in which you can engage and participate in the content that this will be worth your while. Also, just a final note on that before we close the Q&A session here is that we see this Arctic Observing Summit not as a meeting every 2 years, but rather as a process. And so over the next couple of years, the different working groups will continue to their work under the umbrella of the SEAN roadmap for Arctic observing and data systems. And you will be able to, again, through the AOS website and other connections under SEAN, will be able to participate in that process down the line. So it doesn't look like we've got any more questions open here. What I'd like to do is give Peter Schlosser and anybody else on the organizing committee here an opportunity to speak briefly to the summit in the context of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. What do we see there in the ways of work at the summit, and some of the contributions being particularly timely, lining up with broader concerns? Let's spend a few minutes on that, and then we'll come to a conclusion of this call. Peter?
Thanks, Hayo. So we already, of course, have experienced the effect of the outbreak of the coronavirus and the related COVID-19 disease by meeting virtually. But there is another essential component to this pandemic, and that is very directly related to what we are talking about, long-term observations. As many institutions are facing hard choices in terms of which part of the operation they want to keep open, this is now at the point where universities and research institutions are starting to put pressure onto, I mean, justified so, on minimizing the personnel that is active as part of their duties, and that reaches into the research operation. And within the research operation, you can see, of course, easily there's a variety of things. There are long-term lab experiments, there is animal care for medical research, for pharmaceutical research, but, and most important for us, there are also field sites that have to be kept up. And there are, let's say, LTERs, there are other observations that are out in many domains, in our case in the Arctic, and sustaining them might become a challenge. And in some cases it already does pose some challenges to have enough personnel on site or going on site to, you know, keep sensors up and serviced and deploy new sensors, recover them. So we might actually see some issues coming up in sustaining long time series. And of course, then there is the question, to which extent can these tasks be done by local communities, so that, because travel, of course, is also interrupted. So you, in essence, sometimes you cannot even get to the site, even if you have people, you know, who are willing to do that and who are designated as what typically is called essential personnel. But that in itself raises a question of to which extent are local communities, if they take on the maintenance of long-term measurement series, exposed to the virus at a higher level than they would be if they would not participate in these activities. So I'm pretty sure that as we are going through the discussions of during the AOS, including our presentations, keynote addresses, the panel discussions, but especially the discussions in the working groups, that this will come up. So as you are preparing for your working group sessions, it would be good to think a bit about that, think about, you know, which situation you might envision for your particular field, for your particular type of observations, and bring that into the discussion so that we can feel the problems that already are emerging, the problems that we can envision, and most importantly, what kind of solutions we might come up with to minimize the impact of this present anomalous situation on long-term observations.
Thanks, Peter. Any other working group leads that want to add to that? I'm looking in particular, I know, Eva, you're not leading a specific working group, but through your perspective with Inuit Circumpolar Council Canada, is there anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Hayo. ICC had put out a press release when COVID-19 was, you know, starting up basically. There are actually lots of challenges for Indigenous peoples, and also a lot of the health challenges, and particularly dire, obviously, in the Arctic, due to problems with regards to health services and even very profound things like basic infrastructure, water, sewer, and health facilities. So this is really a big problem in the Arctic, and one of the reasons why travel into the Arctic is particularly difficult and restricted now by many communities. At the same time, I think what Peter just mentioned with regards to the ability of communities to do a lot of the observing activities, I think that is something that we will discuss in the Food Security Working Group. So it is definitely something that indigenous peoples look towards to a much more increasing stage, that we do more of the Arctic observing locally. It makes a lot of sense. It also enables communities to be better able to include things like indigenous knowledge, their perspectives, the priorities, etc. I don't necessarily think that it would lead to higher threats with regards to them getting exposed, because oftentimes what you do is, or what indigenous peoples do, is they do this as part of their outdoor activities that they do in any case. So we have lots of experiences, for example, with the Northern Containments Program in the Arctic, where people go out and as part of their daily activities do measurements, etc., and taking care of instruments. So I don't see a problem in that, and I see it more as an opportunity. And one more thing that I wanted to highlight, I also would encourage people to listen to the plenary presentation that was posted from Daily Sambodor, who is the ICC chair. She is also talking about some of the COVID-19 challenges and considerations. It actually also included some problems that we experienced with people being able to participate in the AOS. A lot of people, Inuit in Canada particularly, have problems with broadband, with internet connections, etc. And it made it very challenging for them to participate in the discussions now. So that's very unfortunate, and I hope that we can remedy that in the future and going forward with the AOS over the next years. And as was already said, it's an ongoing process, and we'll hopefully be able to address those things. It's good experiences and important experience that we make today, I think, and at this year.
Great, thank you, Eva. I would like to wrap up this session. We're almost at the top of the hour. But just reflecting on these comments on COVID-19, how does it impact Arctic communities and Arctic indigenous communities in particular? It's a big issue. It's a problem, but it may also be a way for more meaningful and impactful collaboration between researchers from outside of the Arctic, within the Arctic indigenous experts, Arctic communities as a whole. And I would challenge those here on the call, those participating in the Arctic Observing Summit, to think carefully about what are very specific action items that can be taken to build on this particular issue and make progress. Keep in mind that the conclusions and recommendations from the summit here, which will be jointly reviewed with an opportunity to comment by all participants who registered for the summit during a short window of time at the conclusion of the summit later this week. Those recommendations will feed into the Arctic Science Ministerial to be held later this fall. And that ministerial also has a focus on action. You will hear later in the concluding session of this summit from Iceland's Minister for Science and Education, who is one of the co-leading organizers of the ministerial itself. And we feel that this is a great opportunity for the research community, the Arctic indigenous communities, and others who are part of the observing network to very clearly articulate what needs to happen or what should happen in the short term to turn some of the bad that's come out of COVID-19 into something that's good and has a positive, lasting legacy. If there's no further comments from the co-organizers, I'm looking in particular here at the co-chairs, Peter, Þorsteinn, If not, then I, again, yes, Peter, go ahead.
No, I'm fine. Everything's okay. Did Hayo just freeze on us? Hayo, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Am I still muted now? Okay, so Peter, you're going to have to.
We can't hear you.
You're okay now, Hayo.
Okay. Otherwise, you would have had to close me out. Sorry, my internet connection isn't that great either, so I'm calling over the phone. Enjoy the summit. We hope you have a productive time. Communicate with all of us on the organizing committee if you have questions, comments, concerns, and we hope to see you online here over the next few days. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.